You ever read an LSAT reading comp passage and 30 seconds later it's like nothing ever happened? Like your brain read it, yawned, and hit delete? That isn't your fault. The LSAT is deliberately designed to test how much dense, boring, technical, contradictory nonsense you can absorb under time pressure. But here's the twist. The problem isn't just the passage. It's what happens after the passage in your review process. Most students never actually learn from reading comp. They just practice, hope for a miracle, and stay stuck in the low 160s. If that's you, don't worry. Today I'm going to show you how to fix it with a method that works for top scorers. Now let's be brutally honest for a second. Reading comp is the most ignored and most misunderstood section of the LSAT. Everyone obsesses over logical reasoning because it has more questions. But reading comp, most people treat it like the weird relative at Thanksgiving dinner. They tolerate it, they do their best to get through it, and they hope it doesn't show up too often. But here's the problem. Hope is not a strategy. Let's unpack exactly why most students never get better at reading comp, no matter how many passages they do. Now, you could read 100 articles about cooking and still be terrible at making scrambled eggs. Same thing with reading comp. Doing more passages feels productive, you're checking the boxes, you're keeping busy, you even start recognizing recurring passage topics. But if you're not actually processing why you're getting questions wrong, or even why you're getting them right, then all you're doing is building surface level familiarity. Think of it like watching someone else work out at the gym and wondering why you're not getting abs. Now, let me guess what your current reading comp approach looks like. You finish a passage, you check your answers, you get number 22 wrong, and you go, it was D. That's weird. Then you move on. No judgment. This is what 95% of LSAT students do. But it's like falling in a hole, brushing off the dirt, and saying, well, I hope I don't fall in that one again. The thing is, unless you learn, you probably will. The students who improve the fastest aren't necessarily smarter. They're just more curious about their errors. They zoom in on the misstep, they interrogate it, they write down why they got it wrong, what their thought process was, and what they'll do differently next time. That's not extra credit, that is the work. Now, most students treat the passage like a fog bank. They go in, they come out, no map, no landmarks, just vibes. But reading comp isn't about memorizing every single word. It's about organizing information in your mind while you read, like building scaffolding. Without that scaffolding, you can't hang anything on it. So you end up rereading, second-guessing your way through every question. And guess what? That's exhausting. It burns time, energy, and confidence. So if you finish reading and immediately think to yourself, wait, what was that about again? You didn't build structure, you just skimmed. And a lot of students make the mistake of thinking that speed equals success. They'll think, I just need to get faster. This is the LSAT version of crash dieting. You might think the key to a higher score is shaving off seconds, so you rush the passage. You skim the question stem, you glance at the answer choices, and then you bomb it. Speed isn't the goal. Speed is a byproduct of clarity. If you understand the passage well, its structure, tone, and purpose, you'll move faster because you know where to look. But if you shortcut the process just to finish on time, you'll end up spending more time rereading and doubting yourself anyway. So stop trying to be efficient. Start trying to be accurate. And look, I love a good hack as much as the next guy, but reading comp doesn't work like that. You can't out-trick a passage on 19th century French urban planning. You can't eliminate 3 answer choices in 2 seconds just because they sound extreme. And you definitely can't guess your way to a 170. But what you can do is build a process that makes each step of the passage, question, and answer review more predictable. That's what high scorers do. Not because they're geniuses, but because they have a system. Now, let's define it clearly. Improvement in reading comp is not about feeling smarter. It's not about finishing faster. It's about making fewer careless mistakes, getting tricked less often, and knowing exactly why you chose each answer, right or wrong. It's about reading a passage and when you see a global question, being able to pre-phrase the answer before you even look at the choices. It's about noticing that you're falling for out-of-scope answers less and less. That's real progress. That's what mastery looks like. Now, if you wait until the next day to review a passage you struggled with, you've already lost half the lesson. Reviewing while it's fresh, while the frustration, confusion, and "wait, what?" moments are still hot, is when the learning sticks. Think of it like reheating fries. If you wait too long, they're soggy and cold. You've got to eat them while the oil's still popping. Same thing for LSAT review. The longer you wait, the more your brain edits the experience into something smoother than it was. Review immediately while it still hurts a little. Another big mistake I see is when students don't treat reading comp like it's a learnable skill. And this is the biggest mindset shift of all. Reading comp isn't about being a good reader. It's about learning to read LSAT passages, a specific genre with specific rules, rhythms, and patterns. If you treat it like a talent you either have or don't, you're going to stay stuck. But if you treat it like a skill, with components you can isolate, practice, and refine, you're going to get better faster than you think. Just like logical reasoning. So let's talk about what separates top scorers from the rest. It's not raw intelligence. It's not fancy prep courses. It's not some elite level speed reading technique. It's this. When they get a question wrong, or even feel unsure about the one they got right, they stop and analyze it like a crime scene. They don't just ask, what's the right answer? They ask, why did I think the wrong one was right? Why did the right one not feel right at all? What was I thinking at the time? That is the Socratic review method. It's not a gimmick. It's not a flashcard app. It's a mindset. And it works because it forces you to be honest with yourself. Let me show you how it works using a 3-bucket system. Every reading comp mistake falls into one or more of these 3 categories. The first bucket is misunderstanding the passage. In other words, you didn't fully grasp what the author was doing, arguing, or describing in the passage. This could mean you missed the tone. It could mean that you confused who said what. Or maybe you got lost in the structure and couldn't remember which paragraph did what. The symptoms are you finish the passage and your brain goes blank. You can't even pre-phrase the main idea. And you go back to the passage multiple times and still feel lost. This is not a memory issue. This is a processing and structure issue. The way to fix it is to use paragraph summaries to label purpose. Then you mentally tag each paragraph and you practice summarizing the passage in just 1 or 2 sentences before looking at the questions. Think of it like Google Maps. If you don't know where anything is, you're going to get lost. But if you've got even a rough sketch, you can find your way. The second big bucket is misreading the question stem. And this one is sneaky. You see a question and you think, oh, that's a classic main idea. But it was actually asking you for primary purpose or tone or function of a paragraph. That's like answering, what's your favorite dessert with Tuesday? Doesn't make any sense. Right answer, wrong question. The symptoms of this issue are you might answer the question correctly, but for the wrong reason. Or maybe you miss a keyword in the question stem that would have changed your approach. And you go back and realize, wait, that wasn't what I thought it was asking at all. To fix this issue, you've got to slow down. Nobody gets extra points for reading the question in under 2 seconds. You might want to underline key phrases in the question stem, especially for those long, more complex ones. And you've got to pause and ask, what kind of question is this? What kind of answer will it reward? And by the way, you should know that most reading comp questions fall into recurring categories. Start labeling them during your review. For example, main idea, primary purpose, inference, detail, function, and tone are some of the biggest categories. You will start noticing patterns, and that recognition makes you faster and sharper. The third big bucket is traps in the answer choices, and this is the big one. Most students focus on finding the right answer, but top scorers also ask, what made the wrong answer so tempting? Because if you don't see the trap, you're going to fall for it again. Common traps are extreme language, out of scope, distortion, opposite, and true but irrelevant. Extreme language might include must, never, and always. Out of scope is when you bring in ideas that were not discussed in the passage. A distortion is when the choice twists the author's words just enough to sound right, while being technically wrong. An opposite choice is when the author supports something and the answer says they're against it. And true but irrelevant is when, yes, the passage might have said that, but it doesn't actually answer the question. Some symptoms here are when you're between two choices and you choose the wrong one. Or maybe you looked at the right answer and thought to yourself, I guess, but this other one sounds better. Or maybe you pick something that's technically true, but not responding to the question at hand. So to fix this, you want to always ask what specific part of the passage supports this answer. And if an answer feels tempting, pause and ask, is this what the question is specifically asking for? And you want to label every wrong answer with its specific trap type during review. The more you can name the tricks that fooled you, the more immune you become to them. So your review mindset should be to be a detective, not a judge. Because most students look at a wrong answer and say, I'm so bad at this. But top scorers say, interesting. Why did that feel right? What did they do to make that answer sound appealing? One response shuts your brain down and turns it off. The other opens it up. That's the whole spirit of the Socratic review method. Curiosity over judgment. Forensic investigation over self-criticism. If you embrace this, you won't just improve at reading comp. You'll become the kind of test taker who improves every time you get something wrong. And that's the superpower. So let's talk a bit more about what happens when you misunderstand the passage in reading comp. You might finish reading and immediately forget what the passage was about. You might remember a bunch of examples, but not what they were for. You might not be able to tell whether the author agreed, disagreed, or didn't care. Or maybe you got multiple questions wrong, even the so-called easy ones, because you were flying blind. If this is you, it's not a reading problem. It's a structure problem. You didn't build a map. So when LSAC asked, what's the main idea? Your brain went, maybe boats? Now the LSAT isn't testing your ability to read fast or even well. It tests your ability to extract structure from dense writing, ID viewpoints, debates and logical shifts, and mentally label information for retrieval. In other words, it's testing your ability to turn chaos into a system. But most people just read the passage straight through, hoping the important stuff will magically stick. Spoiler, it doesn't. The result? You remember that someone in paragraph 2 said something about economic theory, but not why it mattered. That's like remembering there was a knife in a murder mystery, but forgetting who used it on whom. So here's the fix. Instead of trying to memorize everything, start building a mental roadmap while you read. What is a mental roadmap? It's a simple, structured way of tracking what each paragraph is doing, not just what it's saying. You're asking, is this setting up the topic? Is it introducing a viewpoint? Is it giving an example? Is it offering a criticism? Is the author agreeing or disagreeing? So here is a ridiculously effective exercise. After each paragraph, pause and ask yourself, what was the point of that paragraph in one sentence? Not the details, not the quotes, just the function. For example, maybe paragraph 1 introduces debate about climate modeling. Paragraph 2 explains the mainstream scientific view. Paragraph 3 presents the critic's argument. And paragraph 4 tells us that the author leans toward the critics. That's it. And when you do this consistently, you'll start reading for structure instead of getting lost in the weeds. By the way, this also makes pre-phrasing answers way easier. You'll already know where to look when a question asks, which paragraph discusses critics of the mainstream view? Now let's go over the rookie mistakes that sabotage comprehension. The first big one is highlighting everything. If your passage looks like a rainbow threw up on it, you're doing too much. Highlighting isn't understanding. Most people highlight to compensate for not understanding. The fix is to highlight sparingly, or better yet, stop highlighting altogether for a few weeks. Focus on mentally labeling instead. The second big mistake is taking notes like you're in a grad seminar. I've seen students take 8 minutes just reading the passage because they wrote half a novel on their scratch paper. Remember, you're not getting graded on your notes. You're getting graded on your answers. Your notes should be short, functional, and minimal. Think labels, not paragraphs. The third big mistake is zoning out in paragraph 3. You start strong, you're locked in, and then, Paragraph 3 hits like NyQuil. But don't worry, this happens to everyone. Just know, when you find yourself rereading the same sentence 3 times, that's your cue to pause, sit up straight, and mentally reset. Now, sometimes you read carefully, summarize well, and still bomb the questions. That's okay. It usually means you missed the author's tone or stance. You didn't distinguish between what's described and what's endorsed. You focused too much on detail and missed the big picture. To fix this, start asking these questions after the passage. What was the author trying to do with this piece? What's their attitude? Was it supportive, skeptical, or neutral? And what's the passage's role? Was it to inform, to argue, or to evaluate? Don't just review the questions, review your passage interpretation. Now, here's a tip to help you determine if you actually understood the passage. After reading and before touching the questions, close your eyes and try to teach the passage out loud in a minute or two as if you're explaining it to a friend. You'll instantly see where your understanding is solid, where it's fuzzy, and whether your structure made sense. This is a brutally honest self-check. No shortcuts, no kind of understanding, just you and the ideas. And remember that every single reading comp question, tone, inference, detail, structure, they all depend on how well you understood the passage. If your understanding is shaky, everything else becomes guesswork. If your understanding is solid, even the hardest questions become manageable. So don't rush it. Build the roadmap. Summarize the structure. Know what's happening before you dive into the questions. Because on the LSAT, the better you read, the less you reread. Now let's talk a bit more about what happens when you misread the question. And this one's sneaky. You think you're doing everything right. You read the passage, you summarized each paragraph, and you were feeling good. But then the questions come up, and you botch it. Not because you didn't understand the passage, but because you misread what the question was actually asking. Now, most students skim the question stem like it's a formality. They treat it like a speed bump on the way to the answer choices. They say, yeah, main idea, whatever, let's get to the good stuff. But here's the truth. The question stem is the good stuff. It's the mission briefing. It tells you exactly what kind of thinking you need to do, what to look for, and how to evaluate each answer. If you misread it, it doesn't matter how good the rest of your logic is, you're solving the wrong problem. Now let's go over some of the classic mix-ups students make with reading comp questions. The first big one is main idea versus primary purpose. They sound similar, but they're not the same. Main idea asks, what is the author saying? Primary purpose asks, what is the author trying to do? For example, a passage about a new legal framework might have a main idea like, the author presents and evaluates a new theory. But the primary purpose could be to compare two views on legal responsibility. If you confuse the two, you'll pick answers that sound good, but miss the deeper intention. The second big misread is author's view versus passage detail. Watch out for this trap. According to the passage means what's literally in the text. If they ask, the author would be most likely to agree, they're asking, what can we infer the author believes? If you treat both the same, you're going to end up picking answers that are either too strong for detail or too specific for inference questions. Now, the third big misread is specific versus global questions. Some questions zoom into the specifics like, which one of the following is mentioned in paragraph 3? Others zoom out and ask, which choice best summarizes the passage? Don't use global logic to answer local questions or vice versa. That's like using a sledgehammer to cut paper. The fourth big one is function versus content, and that's a huge one. If they're asking, what is the function of paragraph 2? That is not the same as asking, what does paragraph 2 say? Function is about why the author included it. Was it to give an example, to raise an objection, or offer background? If you treat it like a detail question, you're going to miss the bigger picture. Now, here's a simple fix to these issues. After you read the question, stop for 3 seconds. Seriously, don't skim it, don't speed read, just pause and ask, what type of question is this? What kind of answer will satisfy it? And where should I look in the passage, if anywhere? You don't need a full diagnosis. just a quick mental shift. Now here's a drill you could try. You could make a question stem type flashcard set where you build a list of question stem types like main idea, primary purpose, author's attitude, passage organization, specific detail, inference, function, and analogy. Then, for each type, write down what it's really asking for, how to recognize it, and what wrong answers typically look like. Now, when you're reviewing and come across a confusing stem, you've got a reference point. You're going to build recognition and eventually instinct. Now, the reason to do this kind of exercise is that the LSAT is a master of subtlety. They are professionals at writing tricky question stems. They will intentionally add just a single word that flips the question's focus. They'll use phrases that sound familiar but mean something specific, and they'll include little modifier words that tighten or loosen the scope, like most likely, primarily, and best describes. If you miss those, you're not just at risk of answering wrong, you won't even realize you misunderstood the question until you review, and by then it's too late. So when you realize a misread question stem cost you the question, don't just say oops. Instead, copy the question stem into your error log. Underline the word or phrase you missed. Write a new version of the question phrased clearly, and finally, write a one-sentence rule for how you'll spot this next time. Think of the question stem like your GPS. If you don't plug in the right destination, it doesn't matter how fast you drive, you're going the wrong way. So slow down, read carefully, treat the question stem with respect. And if you do this, you'll watch your accuracy go way up without even touching the choices yet. Now let's talk about what happens when you get tricked by the answer choices. And this is the most frustrating kind of mistake. You read the passage, you understood the structure, and you even carefully read the question stem. Then the choices sucker punched you. You picked something that sounded great until you saw the right answer and thought, wait, how is that better than what I chose? Welcome to the LSAT's signature move, writing wrong answers that sound right and right answers that sound weird. Let's break it down. Now, of course, answer choices on the LSAT aren't written by accident. They're written by professionals whose literal job is to make you second guess yourself. They craft them to sound logical even when they aren't, distract you with technical language, mirror phrases from the passage without preserving the meaning, and creating almost right options that are just wrong enough. If you don't know what to look for, you'll pick the one that feels right, even if it's a trap. Now, choices with extreme language use words like always, never, must, or completely. The LSAT, as a rule, almost never speaks in absolutes, especially in reading comp. If you see an answer with bold, sweeping language, throw up a red flag. Instead, look for moderate claims like sometimes, may, likely, and generally. The second big type of wrong answer is distortion. This is like a funhouse mirror version of the text. It pulls in real ideas from the passage, but twists them just enough to be wrong. And distortion answers are dangerous because they're rooted in truth, but the application is off. So ask, did the author really say this, or did they say something nearby? The third big type of wrong answer is the opposite, where they flip the author's view. If the author supported something, this answer will suggest they were skeptical, or vice versa. And you would be surprised at how often students pick these. Why? Because opposites still feel related, and related is tempting. So for these, recheck the tone. If the author was praising the new method, don't pick an answer suggesting they were critical. The fourth big category of wrong answers is out of scope, and these are the ones that go rogue. They bring in ideas the author never mentioned. And yes, it might be true in the real world, but if the passage doesn't support it, even a little, it's out. So as a rule, if you can't find even a whisper of support in the text, it's a no. The fifth big category is irrelevant truths. These answers are technically accurate, but completely unhelpful. It's like being asked, what's the capital of France, and answering, the Eiffel Tower is in Paris. True? Yes. Is it the answer? No. So always double check. Does this answer actually address what the question is asking? And the sixth type of wrong answer is recycled language without meaning. Sometimes the test makers borrow words or phrases from the passage to make an answer seem legit, even if the underlying logic is garbage. Just because an answer says revenue neutral carbon tax doesn't mean it's the right one. Don't fall for LSAT Mad Libs. Think to yourself, do I understand what this answer means, and does it actually follow from the passage? Now, of course, you're not going to dodge every trap on day one, but you can train yourself to spot the patterns. Here's how. First, you want to label every wrong answer you fell for. Was it extreme, out of scope? Was it the opposite, or was it a distortion? Then create a personal trap tracker. Keep a note or spreadsheet of the traps that fooled you. Write one sentence about why each answer was tempting, and write one sentence about why it was wrong. Then rephrase the correct answer. Take the right answer and explain it in your own words. Ask, what specific part of the passage supports this? This is how you build what I call trap fluency. You start seeing patterns, and eventually the traps become obvious. Now let's talk about what to do when you're torn between two choices. And you know that feeling. You've eliminated 3 choices, and 2 remain. You hate them both. Here's what to do. Check for trap types. Is one of them more extreme? Is one introducing new ideas? Is one clearly tied to a specific part of the passage? Then reread the question stem and make sure that you're solving the right problem. And finally, ask which one is less wrong. Sometimes both feel bad. Choose the one that is least offensive to the logic and the text. And whatever you do, don't guess blindly and move on. If you had a 50-50 moment, document it in your review. There's gold in that uncertainty. And stop asking, why is this one right? And instead, start asking, why are the others wrong? This is a total mindset shift. Most students obsess over finding the right answer, and they ignore the rest. But here's the problem. On the LSAT, wrong answers are your greatest teacher. If you understand why the 4 wrong ones are wrong, the right one becomes obvious. And even better, you build resistance to those traps on future questions. So, in your review, train yourself to explain why each wrong answer is wrong. Not just, meh, doesn't sound good, but specifically why. If you can't explain it, you didn't learn it. And this is the mindset I want you to take away right now. On the LSAT, answer choices aren't neutral. They are designed to fool you. If you're picking based on what sounds right, you're playing on the LSAT's terms. But when you slow down, analyze the traps, and label the techniques they're using, you start playing on your terms. And that's when reading comp starts feeling like a game you can actually win. Now let's talk about what to do when you're stuck between 2 answers, the infamous 50-50 moment. You've knocked out 3 choices, you're down to 2, you stare, you squint, you reread the question, then you reread both answers, then the passage, then the question again. You look at the clock, panic sets in, and eventually you guess. And half the time, you get it wrong anyway. Now here's the thing nobody tells you. Most 50-50 decisions on the LSAT aren't actually toss-ups. You think you're stuck between 2 good choices. In reality, one of them is usually flawed. You just haven't spotted the flaw yet. The trick is learning how to pull those flaws into the light. So when you're stuck between 2 choices, go deeper. Instead of thinking which one feels better, ask, what does this answer actually mean? What specifically in the passage supports this? Does the answer use extreme language, or subtle distortion, or out-of-scope ideas? Write it out if you have to. That extra 30 seconds of clarity will do more for your score than blind intuition ever could. Now here's a great drill you can do in practice and even during your review. First, you put the choices next to each other on the page. You write a 1-sentence paraphrase of each one in plain English. Then you ask yourself, what is the core difference between these 2 ideas? Sometimes one answer is very specific and the other is more general. Sometimes one restates a detail and the other captures the author's argument. And sometimes one is just word salad. Regardless, this process forces you to stop guessing and start dissecting. And there are certain little clues that can instantly reveal a trap in one of the 2 contenders. If you see words like always, completely, or must, that is a red flag that you're dealing with extreme language. If you see them saying, this suggests that all scientists agree, be suspicious. If they say the author believes X causes Y in every case, that is far too strong. Also, be wary of answers that restate content from the wrong part of the passage. Just because it sounds familiar doesn't mean it answers the question. Now, I know we already covered this, but it's worth repeating here. Often, when you're stuck between two answers, it's because you're solving the wrong problem. So reread the question stem slowly. Ask, is this a main idea question? Is it a tone question? Is it an inference question? Am I answering what was said or what was implied? Was this a local question tied to a paragraph, or was it a global question? You might realize that one of your two answers is disqualified before you even get back to the text. Now, when you do guess, do it strategically, not emotionally. Now, I know that when time is running out, you might be feeling stressed, but here's how to make your guesses count. In general, all else being equal, favor the more moderate answer because the LSAT loves subtlety. Favor the more text-based answer, not the one that has flashy new ideas. And favor the one that matches the author's tone. If they were neutral, don't pick the spicy critique. And once you choose, mark it for review. Don't just move on and hope. Come back to it after the section and do a full post-mortem. What made you hesitate? What were you really weighing? And what trap almost fooled you? Those almost wrong moments are gold mines for improvement. Now, to collect the data on your 50-50 guesses, I want you to create a tracker that lists every time you get stuck between two answers. List the passage, the question number, the wrong answer you picked, the right one, why you got stuck, and what you're going to do next time. Then review it weekly. Over time, patterns are going to jump out. You'll realize, oh wow, I always pick the stronger of two inferences even when it's too strong. Or every time I'm between a detail and a main idea, I lean toward the wrong one. Now you've got data, and data leads to insights. Insights lead to better decisions under pressure. Now let's talk about the most dangerous type of LSAT question. It's not the one you got wrong, it's the one you got right for the wrong reason. These are what I call the landmine questions. You tiptoe through them, guess right, and think you're in the clear until the next test when the same question type comes back and blows up your score. If you're not reviewing your lucky guesses, you're setting yourself up to repeat the same mistake later, just with a different outcome. Now, here's the psychology. You check the answer key, it's correct, you get a little dopamine hit, and you move on. But you never stop to ask, why did I pick this? Would I get it right again tomorrow? And what made me uncertain in the first place? So the same flaw in your thinking stays hidden, untouched, untested, until test day. And then you get a similar question. You do the same thing, but this time it's wrong and you feel blindsided. But you weren't. You just never reviewed the cracks in your foundation. So when you are reviewing a section, star any question where you were unsure between two answers, you picked one because it felt right, and you thought, I guess it's C, but you weren't really sure why. Maybe you chose based on elimination without having true confidence, and you would never be able to explain your reasoning to someone else. Just because you chose the right answer doesn't mean your thought process was correct. So when you find a question where you got it right, but you weren't sure, I want you to do the following. First, reconstruct your thinking. Write down what you were thinking during the question, what the competing answer choices were, why you leaned toward the one you picked, and what part of the passage you were relying on. And if this sounds tedious, good. That means it's working. You can't fix vague logic with vague review. Now, the next step is to reprove the right answer. Now ask yourself, what part of the passage directly supports the correct answer? What's the trap in the wrong one? And what's the exact reason LSAC would eliminate it? If you can now clearly articulate why your right answer is right and why the others are not, you've turned a lucky guess into real understanding. Now, the goal is not just to understand the passage, it's to understand how you think under pressure and to refine that. So when you find these moments, write down what mistake you almost made, what language or trap almost fooled you, and what you'll do differently when you see a similar question in the future. This is what top scorers do without being told. And now you're going to do it too. Now, I want you to build another tracker here. This is one where you got it right, but you didn't deserve it. A log of all those situations. You want to label it with your question number, the passage topic, the question type, why you were unsure, why you ended up getting it right, and what you learned. Over time, you're going to start seeing patterns here too. You'll notice that, for example, every time there's an inference question, I hesitate on extreme language. Or maybe you'll say, I always struggle with tone questions on passages with neutral language. Or I pick the right answer, but I don't even know why half the time. Now you're going to have a roadmap for what to focus on next. Now here is another optional drill I want you to consider. This is the confidence drill, and it's powerful for self-awareness. After each question, rate your confidence on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is a total guess, 3 is you're kind of unsure, and 5 is you would bet real money on it. Then, after the section, compare your confidence to your results and look for mismatches. If you got it right, but your confidence level was only 1 or 2, that means there is a hidden weakness here. If you got it wrong, but your confidence was a 5, you are dangerously overconfident. And if your confidence level is a 3, you're in the neutral zone and you need clarity. This is how you train not just accuracy, but judgment, which matters just as much under pressure. Now let's talk about the worst kind of LSAT moment, the blackout. You read a passage, you try to answer the questions, and then nothing. It's not just that you got it wrong, it's that you have no idea why. Your mind goes blank. Your review plan goes out the window. And the only thing you do know is that you never want to see that passage again. Now here's the truth. These no clue moments are normal. They happen to everybody, even top scorers. The difference is top scorers don't avoid them. They go toward them like a scientist examining a strange specimen. So let me show you how to do that with no judgment, no shame, and no quitting. First, I want you to adopt a mindset shift. If your review approach is to skip the ugly stuff and then move on, you're just baking your weaknesses in. What separates elite scorers is how they respond to confusion. They don't say, I'm dumb. They say, cool. A diagnostic moment. Let's find the crack. They treat confusion like a GPS saying recalculating. It's not a failure, it's feedback. So when you're staring at a passage you bombed and your brain says, I don't even know where to begin, do this. First, reread the passage slowly out loud. Seriously, do it out loud. Your brain processes language differently when you vocalize it. And reading silently often turns into skimming with extra steps. Reading out loud forces you to slow down and re-engage. It also activates a secondary sensory channel, auditory instead of visual, which helps with comprehension and retention. Then, paraphrase each paragraph in plain English. Not LSAT speak, not fancy test prep language, just your words. For example, you're asking, what's the point of paragraph 1? And then you answer, oh, it's saying some scientists think climate models are unreliable. Good. That's all you need. Do this one paragraph at a time, and don't move on until you can paraphrase. Then write a 2-sentence summary of the whole passage to pull it all together. You're answering the questions, who are the players, what are the viewpoints, and what is the author's tone or position, if any. If you can summarize the whole passage clearly, you're ready to reapproach the questions. Now rework each one like it's brand new. Read the question twice. Before looking at the answers, ask yourself, what exactly is this asking me to find? Then, and only then, look at the answer choices. Treat this like training, not a race. Even if it takes 10 minutes to solve one question, it's worth it, because you're building muscles that will make the next passage take 2 minutes less. Now, if you still don't get it, explain it to a 10-year-old. Now, after reviewing, try explaining the passage to someone else or even to yourself out loud as if they're 10 years old. If you can't do it, it means you don't really get it yet. Don't panic, just go back and do it again. Ask, what's the big idea? Why was this important? And what did the author believe? If you can teach it simply, you understand it deeply. Now, log those blackout moments too, because they are a secret weapon. You could label it the no clue section in your error log if you want to. Same questions as in the other logs. These are going to be your greatest hits for growth, your before and after moments. Because the first time you saw that abstract sociology passage, you were toast. But now you've got a system. And you are going to break down the confusion like you're a mechanic. When a car doesn't work, the mechanic doesn't throw out the car, they lift the hood and investigate. So you should do the same with your thought process. Ask, was I confused by the vocabulary? Did I lose track of the viewpoints? Did I fail to build a mental roadmap? Was I thrown off by the tone, the structure, or the examples? Every point of confusion is a clue. If you follow them, you're going to find the root cause. Now, you're not going to improve by doing the easy passages over and over. You improve by confronting your weak spots and turning them into strengths. Every moment where you have no clue what's going on is a signal of where your intuition breaks down, of which passage types need more attention, and of what to prioritize in your next study block. You're not failing here, you're learning. Now let's talk about error logs for a minute. Most students don't have one, and the ones who do, it's a mess of half-baked notes like, got question 14 wrong, reread STEM, or D was right, I guess. The thing is, you can't fix what you don't understand, and you can't understand what you don't track. So let's talk about how to build a reading comp error log that actually does what it's supposed to, make you better. Now here's the thing most students miss. Reading comp mistakes aren't just wrong answers, they're signals. And your job is to collect those signals and organize them so you can start making strategic adjustments. Every question you miss, or even barely get right, is a clue. And if you document those clues well, you're going to uncover patterns that are costing you 5, 10, even 15 points across the test. And that right there is the difference between staying stuck in the mid 160s and breaking into the 170s. Now there are 6 essential columns for your error log. I want you to keep it simple, ideally Google Sheets, maybe Google Doc or Notion, doesn't matter, just track it consistently. You're going to list the passage topic, the question number, the question type, the error type, what fooled you, and your correction or key takeaway. That's it, 6 columns. And if you do it consistently, this becomes a blueprint for what to focus on next. Now, if you want to take it to the next level, here are some additional fields you could add, but only if you want to. You add your confidence rating on a scale of 1 to 5, how long it took you, and any personal notes where you talk to your future self about what you'll do differently next time around. Now, once a week, you take this error log and you do a pattern review. You ask, which passage topics am I bombing? Which question types show up the most? Which trap types am I still falling for? And what seems to be improving? From there, you pick just 1 or 2 small focus points for the coming week. For example, you might say, I'm going to slow down on function questions, or I'll pause after each paragraph to build a better roadmap. Now, let's say you miss 7 inference questions in 3 weeks. Don't just log them, actually group them and use your log to build a mini reading comp drill library. It could be just inference questions you've missed over the past few weeks, or all the questions from legal passages you tanked, or every primary purpose question that tricked you. Then you go back and you redo those later. That is high efficiency review. You're drilling your specific weak points, not just general ones. Now, if English is not your first language, reading comp becomes that much more challenging. It's like trying to run uphill through molasses with ankle weights on. The LSAT doesn't use normal English. It uses what I call LSAT English. They have sentences that run 4 lines long, vocabulary that came out of a 19th century legal dictionary with dense metaphors, layered clauses, and subtle tone shifts. And even native speakers struggle with all of this. So if you're not a native speaker of English, you're not behind, you're just playing the game on hard mode. But here's the good news. You can still crush this section, you just need a smarter strategy. The first step is to stop trying to read perfectly and instead start reading functionally. This is key. If you're used to academic reading or translating word for word, you might feel the need to understand every single term. But on the LSAT, that's a trap. You don't need to understand every single word, but you do need to understand what's the paragraph doing, who's saying what, where are the viewpoints, and what's the author's attitude. That's it. Think of it like watching a soccer match. You don't need to understand every single play. You just need to know who's winning and how the game is flowing. Now, don't try to memorize how the LSAT talks. Instead, translate it into your voice. So for example, if they said, quote, legal formalists contend that the interpretation of statutory texts should be confined to the plain meaning of their language, that's LSAT speak. Your version should be, one group thinks laws should only mean what the words literally say. Boom, that's it. Say it in your own words, even if it's clunky at first. Understanding beats elegance every single time. Then I want you to start building a personal dictionary of words that trip you up. Not all vocabulary lists are helpful, but yours will be. Anytime you read a word and pause, even for a second, add it to your list. For example, you might include words like mitigates, refutes, or advocates. And over time, this glossary will become your decoding tool. And here's the kicker. The LSAT recycles vocabulary all the time. So if you learn a word once, you'll cash in on that effort again and again. And when the vocabulary gets overwhelming, fall back on structure. Ask, what's the role of paragraph 1? Where do the viewpoints start? And does the author step in with their opinion? You don't need to catch every metaphor or subtle phrasing, but if you know the shape of the argument, you can still answer almost every question. Structure beats details every single time. Now, for non-native speakers, the physical act of writing helps process language faster and more deeply. So try this. After each paragraph, write one sentence like, this paragraph explains view A and gives an example. After the passage, write down 2 more. The author compares viewpoint A and viewpoint B. They prefer viewpoint B. This helps you clarify meaning as you go, instead of waiting till you're knee-deep in questions with no foundation. Now, reading aloud or mouthing the words can help non-native speakers dramatically, especially if your brain processes spoken English better than written English. Even whispering helps engage auditory memory and slows you down just enough to understand the rhythm and structure of the passage. You might look weird at the library, but who cares? You're going to look smart when your score jumps 10 points. Now, instead of doing full passages all the time, try this. Pick a question type that gives you trouble, like inference or main idea. Go through 10 to 15 questions of just that type. Focus on understanding the phrasing and logic behind that one question type. It's like weightlifting. You don't train everything at once. You build isolated strength in each movement. Now, it's easy to feel behind when the language is working against you, so start logging wins too. For example, I translated this dense sentence and understood it, or I ID'd the author's opinion without rereading. These moments matter and your confidence will compound. Now, let's be honest, the LSAT reading comp section isn't just a test of comprehension. It's a test of endurance. Passage 1, you're locked in, you're feeling focused and sharp. Passage 2, you're still good, but then passage 3 comes and you're getting slower. And by passage 4, you're reading the words, but your brain is checked out. You look up at the clock, and now it's a race against time. Sound familiar? If so, you're not alone. Mental fatigue is one of the most common and least addressed reasons students miss easy points in reading comp. So let's fix that. Now, the reason most students flame out by passage 4 is not because they're bad at reading, it's because they've spent 20 minutes grinding through dense technical writing without a break. The topics are dry, the structure is subtle, and the stakes are high. So by the time you hit passage 4, your brain is begging for a nap. But here's the problem. The LSAT doesn't care. The questions in passage 4 are worth just as much as the ones in passage 1, and they're often harder. So if you want to maximize your score, you've got to train your brain to show up when it matters most. And you don't build endurance by doing only one passage a day. It's like training for a marathon by running to the mailbox. If you want to build real reading comp stamina, you've got to simulate the real thing. And that means that you stop doing one-off passages and start doing full sections. If you're only doing isolated passages, you're not testing the muscle that burns out on test day, your mental focus. From now on, make full 35-minute reading comp sections your default practice. This helps you train your pacing under pressure. You learn how to rebound between passages, and you experience real test day fatigue and build resilience to it. This is your version of scrimmage. It's where you go from looks good in drills to performs well under fire. Now here's a powerful trick. Build a 15-second reset routine between passages. Try this. Sit up straight, roll your shoulders back, close your eyes for one deep breath, and mentally say, new game, new start, let's go. You don't need a 5-minute break. You just need a pattern interrupt, a way to break out of the fatigue loop and start the next passage with a clean slate. Think of it like wiping the chalkboard before you write the next thing. It gives you fresh mental space. So I want you to start tracking your performance by passage number. Ask, am I consistently missing questions on passage 4? Does my accuracy dip after 25 minutes? Do I slow down too much in the middle? Once you ID your personal energy curve, you can adjust your strategy. Maybe you're going to speed up earlier to buy time later. Maybe you'll build endurance through doing more practice. Or maybe you want to rearrange passage order to maximize your focus. This is how elite athletes train. So why not apply the same mindset here? Now here's a more advanced technique you might want to try sometimes. Occasionally, do 2 reading comp sections back to back. Why? Because if you can stay sharp through 8 passages, 4 is going to feel easy on test day. It's like training at high altitude. When you come back to normal conditions, everything feels lighter. Now, I also want you to try building up your focus like it's a muscle. You shouldn't expect right off the bat to be able to stay laser focused for 35 minutes in your first reading comp section. So start off a bit smaller. Try staying focused for just 10 minutes straight, then 15, then 20 without rereading. Use a timer, use full-length practice, and celebrate the wins, because every focused minute is helping to build up your LSAT endurance. Now this one's gonna sound scary, but I promise it's one of the fastest ways to build rock-solid reading comp skills. Here's the drill. Read the passage once, then put it away, and answer every single question without looking back. No highlighting, no rereading, no scanning for line references, just you and your brain. And if it sounds intense, that's the point. This is how you stress test your comprehension and learn where your understanding breaks down. Now, the reason this works so well is because most students rely on the passage as a crutch. They treat reading comp like it's an open book test. They say, I'll just go back for that, or I kind of get the idea, but I'll go back and reread when I need to. The problem is that on test day, rereading takes time, and it often leads to second guessing. This drill forces you to slow down while you're reading, to actually internalize the structure, to build better memory through summarization, and to recognize what types of questions you can answer from memory and which require specific detail hunting. And once you do that, the test gets a whole lot easier. So here is the exact step-by-step play to run this drill. First, you read the passage once. You take your time, but not too much. Read it under normal test conditions, around 3 minutes, maybe 4 max. Then you summarize the passage without looking. You close the passage, then write down a brief summary, 1 or 2 sentences, and for a bonus, write a 1-sentence summary for each paragraph also. Then answer all the questions just from memory. Go through the questions as if the passage didn't even exist. No peeking, no scanning, no rereading. Then mark your confidence on each one. A 1 is a total guess. A 5 means you're completely certain. This is going to help you track how well your brain held on to the structure. Then, after you finish, reopen the passage and review your answers. Check which ones you got right, where your summaries failed you, and which choices made you wish you could reread. The goal here is not to get everything right. The goal is to learn where your process breaks down and to improve from your first read. Now, let's break down the skills this single drill builds. It teaches you to read for structure, not just the content. You start noticing where the author introduces viewpoints, which paragraphs do what, and where the key examples live. You're no longer trying to remember everything, you're remembering where things are. The second benefit is that you're building up your mental endurance and attention skills because you're forced to retain ideas over 7 to 8 questions. It's like running with a weighted vest on. Hard now, but easier later. The third benefit is that you get immediate feedback on your comprehension skills. If you get a main idea or tone question wrong, that's not a bad question. It's a signal that you didn't really understand the passage on your first read. And now you know exactly what to fix. So to get the most out of this drill, I want you to start off with easier passages. Don't dive into the hardest science passage ever on day one. Warm up with an easy passage on a topic that you like. And do one drill like this a day for a week. Track the accuracy of your summaries and you'll find that you improve faster than you think. Then compare your memory-based answers to the passage afterward. Did your summary miss a key viewpoint? Did it misrepresent the tone? Did it confuse who said what? That's where the learning is. Now, you know those global questions like main idea, primary purpose, and tone? They're all easier when you summarize before looking at the choices. If you train yourself to write down a summary immediately after you read, you're going to start automatically pre-phrasing for global questions. And that means fewer traps, faster decisions, and more points. Now let's talk about one of the most common LSAT habits. You open a passage, and within 30 seconds, your screen starts to glow like a neon sign. Highlight here, underline there, scratch paper full of notes. You feel productive, organized, and in control. But then the questions start, and suddenly, all that highlighting doesn't seem to help. You're scanning, you're second guessing, and you're rereading. What happened? Here's the truth. Most students are using marking as a crutch, a way to feel like they're understanding without actually understanding. So let's break down what really works and what doesn't when it comes to memory, marking, and retention. You know this instinct. You read a passage that seems important and your brain goes, better highlight that just in case. Then you highlight another, and suddenly the whole paragraph is full of highlights. But the problem is, highlighting is passive. It tricks you into feeling like you're doing something useful, but unless you're mentally processing why the sentence matters, it's just decoration. You don't get points for coloring, you get points for comprehension. Now let's go through what happens when you rely too heavily on note-taking. You slow down. You're not just reading, you're switching tasks every few seconds. Read, pause, highlight, take notes, reread, and that adds up. You also create false security because you think to yourself, I'll come back to this later if I need to. But under time pressure, you rarely do. And even if you do, it takes time to reorient. And finally, you don't build structure. You're focusing on the individual trees, not the forest. And when the LSAT asks you about the function of a paragraph or the overall tone, your highlighting's not going to help. So here's what top scorers do instead. They don't rely on highlights or notes. They rely on mental labeling, selective note-taking, and structured summaries. Here's what that looks like. You read each paragraph and you ask, what was the point of this? You mentally label its function. Setup, background, example, objection, rebuttal, and so on. And if they do mark anything, it's sparingly and with purpose. For example, instead of underlining a full sentence, they might just underline the word however to flag a tone shift. That's not marking for the sake of marking, it's marking for structure. Now here is a drill to break your highlight addiction. After each paragraph, write down just one sentence. Ask what happened here and what was the paragraph doing. After the passage, write down the main idea in just one sentence. When you do this, you're going to start building structural memory, passage organization skills, and mental clarity without the crutch of color coding. You'll feel naked at first, and that's good. It means you're actually learning. If you really can't quit marking cold turkey, here's how to do it smarter. Limit yourself to only 3 to 5 markings per passage. Force prioritization. And mark tone shifts or competing viewpoints because those are the areas the LSAT loves to test. And most importantly, if you mark something, ask why. What does this marking or highlight help you recall later? If you can't answer that, then don't mark it. Now let's talk about the silent killer of reading comp, inference questions. They don't look scary, they don't have technical terms, and they don't even seem that hard, but they consistently trip up even the most advanced students. Why? Because inference questions test what you think you understand, but haven't actually proven. They ask you to read between the lines, but only just enough. Too far? You're wrong. Too literal? Also wrong. Let's talk about what inference questions are really asking. They're usually asking something like, which of the following is most supported by the passage? Or which statement would the author most likely agree with? What they want is a conclusion that is almost literally stated in the passage, but not quite. It's not your job to dream up a creative interpretation. It's your job to find a choice that is slightly shorter, slightly more general, or slightly reworded from something the passage already said. Think a 1-inch leap, not a 10-foot pole vault. Now here's what makes these questions so frustrating and tricky. All 5 choices sound kind of reasonable. You often can't prephrase as clearly as you could for a main idea question, and the right answer might not be anywhere near your notes or your highlights. So you end up rereading, overthinking, and second-guessing. Then you pick the one that feels safest, which is exactly what the LSAT wants you to do. Now let's break down the wrong answers the LSAT loves to use. They love to take a subtle idea and crank up the volume to 11 by making it too strong. If the passage says, some critics have questioned, the wrong answer might say, the majority of scholars reject. This is the most common trap. If the answer feels like it's jumping to a bold claim, check the passage. Did the author actually say that? If not, toss it. The second biggie is out-of-scope choices. These answers introduce a new idea that sounds related but isn't supported. If the passage says, quote, a legal principle applied in environmental cases, the wrong answer might say, the author would support extending this to criminal law. Nope, that's a guess. Eliminate it. The third big one is when the choice is the opposite of what's true or a distortion of what's true. Either way, it's misinterpreting the tone or the viewpoint. If the passage tone is that the author is cautiously optimistic, a wrong answer might say the author is deeply skeptical. Way off, not supported by the passage. So let's keep your process for inference questions simple and repeatable. First, read the question stem carefully. Look for subtle phrasing like most likely to agree, suggests, or implies. These are all inference signals. Then, try to prephrase, but don't panic if you can't. Totally normal. Unlike a main idea question, you often don't know what the answer will look like. Then, you want to check each answer against the passage. For every choice, ask, is this fully supported by the passage, or does it go one step too far? Look out for more safe answers that are more moderate, because the right answer will usually be moderately worded, like saying sometimes, may, often, or some. It might be a rewording or a soft conclusion based on what's in the passage, and it'll be logically implied, which means it's not emotionally satisfying. Then eliminate the ones that are tempting but unsupported by the passage. If it sounds like a hot take, it's probably a trap. Now, when you get stuck, which will happen from time to time, ask yourself, what part of the passage made me even consider this answer? If you can't find a sentence or even a paragraph that supports the choice, eliminate it. But if you find a sentence that almost says what the answer says, and the wording is slightly more general or slightly shorter, you're probably on the right track. This is especially helpful when you're down to 2. One choice will usually have a clear anchor in the text, and that's the one you want to pick. Now, here's something top scorers do that most other students don't. They predict the right answer before they look at the choices. This is called prephrasing. And while it doesn't work perfectly on every question, it's your best friend for global questions, the ones about main idea, primary purpose, passage structure, and author's opinion. So prephrasing is pausing before you look at the choices and you ask, what do I think the right answer will say? Then you write it down, literally on your scratch paper or mentally in your head. And it does not have to be elegant. It doesn't have to be LSAT style. It just needs to capture the essence. Then, when you do look at the choices, you're comparing them to your prediction, not just reacting to what sounds good. Now, when you skip prephrasing, here's what happens. You start reading the answers without a clear goal in mind. They all sound kind of right and kind of wrong. You waste time going back to the passage to double check, and you fall for the one that's phrased the nicest, even if it's off. But when you prephrase, you clarify your thinking before being influenced by trap choices. You spot awkward or distorted phrasing instantly, and you play offense, not defense. That's how top scorers stay in control. So let's say the question asks, which of the following best states the author's main idea? You pause and you ask yourself, what did the author really want me to take away? What did each paragraph do? And where did the author agree or disagree? Now, you mentally draft your answer. For example, it might say, the author introduces a debate about X, explains both sides, and ultimately supports Y. That's your prephrase. Now, you go to the answers and you find the one that matches, not word for word, of course, but idea for idea. Now, you don't need a perfect prephrase. This is not about writing the answer in LSAC's exact language. It's about clarity of thought. Even a 5-second rough version is better than nothing. Maybe you're going to say for your prephrase, the author prefers viewpoint A, but notes some flaws. That alone will help you eliminate 2 to 3 choices instantly. Now, sometimes you can't prephrase. Sometimes the passage is dense or weird, and your summary feels fuzzy. That's okay. Still, I want you to summarize the tone. Is it positive, negative, or neutral? I want you to ID the structure. Is it compare and contrast, critique, or explain? And can you eliminate the obviously wrong tones or formats in the choices? You don't need a crystal clear prephrase every single time. But if you never do it, you're giving up on one of the easiest LSAT advantages available. Now, prephrasing works best for more global questions like main idea, primary purpose, passage structure, and author's opinion. It's going to be more hit or miss for inference and detail questions. Now, let's get one thing straight. If you misunderstand the main idea of the passage, it's going to wreck everything else. The main idea is your foundation. And if your foundation is off, by even a little, every question you answer is sitting on shaky ground. It's like building a house with a crooked blueprint. Doesn't matter how fancy the kitchen is, the whole thing's tilted. So let's dig into why this happens and how to fix it. Usually it goes like this. You read too fast, trying to keep your momentum. You get caught up in an example and mistake it for the big picture. You remember what was said, but not why it was said. And you conflate the author's tone with the topic's tone. Then you land on a vague, half-accurate summary like, this passage is about how scientists think climate models are complicated. Sure, but why did the author write it? Were they explaining, critiquing, supporting, warning, advocating? If you miss the author's purpose, you're going to misinterpret every global question that follows. So let's say you misunderstood the main idea. Now look at what happens. For the main idea question, you pick something too narrow or too general. For the primary purpose question, you miss the author's intent entirely. For the tone, you confuse a neutral explanation with a subtle critique. For the structure, you mislabel the role of a paragraph because you misunderstood the big picture. And for an inference question, you misinterpret what the author would be most likely to agree with. One bad summary leads to 5 questions you got wrong. That's how scores plummet. So here's how to know if your main idea is off. If you can't summarize the passage in one sentence, if you're saying what the topic was, but not what the author did with it, if you feel fuzzy going into the first question, and if you're relying too heavily on the search function because you don't know where to look. If you've ever started the questions thinking, I'm not sure what this was really about, that's the red flag. So don't wait until you get a question wrong to revisit the main idea. Check your work up front. After you read the passage, ask, what was the author's overall purpose here? What's the takeaway? Not the details, the main point. And if I had to explain this in one sentence, what would I say? And by the way, for a pro tip, do this before you start the questions. Take 10 seconds to lock in your summary. It's going to save you 10 minutes of back and forth guessing later. So I want you to use the following template to test your comprehension after each passage. In this passage, the author describes or critiques or supports or compares main topic in order to author's goal. For example, in this passage, the author critiques the reliability of climate models in order to highlight their limitations and suggest the need for alternative approaches. Now you've got the structure, the tone, and the purpose. That's your map. Now, students will often say, the author thinks X is important. Okay, but how is it important? Do they support it, criticize it, acknowledge it with skepticism? The LSAT does not reward vague. They reward precision. So be specific. Was the author advocating, describing, comparing, refuting, or defending? Lock it in, write it down, say it out loud, and don't move on until you've nailed it. Now, most people finish a reading comp section, check their answers, shrug, and move on. But top scorers, they break it down. They ask why. They get forensic and they build a system. That's the difference. You don't need to read faster. You don't need to be smarter. You just need to review like it actually matters, because it does.